Okay, today I have 5 books for you guys that if I had to start reading again for the first time, and when I say for the first time, when I got back into reading, when it became a habit, but where would be the place that I start? Where are the 5 books that I would recommend to myself? And this is a very personal list, so I'm sure you're not going to enjoy it, but these are just my suggestions for myself. Maybe you enjoy them, maybe you don't, and maybe you pick them up because I suggested them. Why not? First thing we have is Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. The reason I selected this is because I feel like we all know the story of Caesar. I feel like we all kind of know about his downfall and the Ides of March and that sort of stuff. But it's another thing when you have one of the greatest writers of all time, or if you believe it's a collection of writers. I mean, there's all the theories on who Shakespeare really was. My favorite is that it was Sir Francis Bacon, but who knows if that's true? Who knows if we'll ever get the answer? I think it's more fun as a mystery than anything else. But yeah, Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. You can't go wrong. It's the story of Caesar's death, and it does a really good job of explaining the different characters, explaining the dynamics. It's not too much focused on the history, which I find extremely boring, but it's about the drama, it's about the story, it's about the premonitions, it's about the eternal issue of man, of should I sacrifice what I already have for the sake of something more, and when is enough, and sort of ambition being the downfall of all great men. And I think it's just one of those classic stories, extremely short. You can read all the Shakespeare plays in one sitting. Obviously, because if you go to a play, are you going to be sitting there for an entire day? No. So for that reason alone, you can finish it within an hour, 2 hours, a few hours. It depends how fast you read, but really, really good story. A lot of eternal lessons and a lot of things to keep coming back for. And I think right now this is my favorite Shakespeare play. It might change as I read more of them. I've read just a handful of them, not even close to all of them, but it's a good place to start, and it's a really fun thing to read with a really timeless tale. The next thing we have is actually a you know what I'm going to say. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is a collection of her works. I gave my version of Frankenstein to somebody to read, so we're just going to go with this. But why I am suggesting Frankenstein is because I think Frankenstein is one of the best books ever written. I just have to flat out say that it really is. I think it's that eternal myth of man selling his soul to the devil, and I think it's done in an interesting way. And not just that, it's really the first horror story. It's really the first kind of work of its genre, and it's Mary Shelley. It's astounding that she was able to write this, because there's something in this that is just so profound, that is so universal, that is just it really just transcends time. Think of how many times Frankenstein has been adapted. Think of how much it is in our collective consciousness, and it was written so long ago. It's a marvel. And then you get into the actual content of the writing. It has this eerie tone to it. It has this struggle for man to create technology, and does technology actually benefit us, or does it harm us? And then it has this repeating myth similar to Shakespeare: is it worth sacrificing what you have to have more? And essentially it somewhat rivals the Shakespearean or the Greek tragedies in its story. I'm not going to reveal it. I'm not going to talk exactly about what happens. I think you need to read it for yourself. But you can't go wrong with reading Frankenstein. Really, really, really one of the best books ever written. And the reason I put this on this list is, one, it's a tremendous story. It's one of those stories that I think we all need to read. But as well, I think you're going to get a whole lot of stuff from it. I think you're going to see this theme repeat time and time again, and you're really going to get a lot of bang for your buck while reading Frankenstein. A lot of the messaging that you're going to discover and find in other books, it's going to be like, oh, it was already there in Frankenstein. And that's what I've realized. The more books I read, the more I appreciate Frankenstein, because it does all of the things I was looking for so well. And it's a book I've reread. It's a book I'm going to continue to reread, and it's astounding. It's tremendous. It's truly one of the greatest things that was ever written, and yes, you need to read it. The next thing we have is The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. This is something I read recently, and this is something I wish I read when I was much younger. I think this is the perfect book for anybody at any age, because essentially it's a story about the undying spirit of humanity, the undying spirit of an old man who is up against his mortality, up against his death. He is a great fisherman, but he has not been getting lucky, and essentially everyone thinks he's finished. Everyone thinks he's done. Everyone thinks that he doesn't have it. And I'm not going to give too much of the details away, but it's an old man proving to himself that he still has a lust for life, that he still has the will to fight, and it really does do a lot of things in such a simple story, and you're going to be pleasantly surprised by this story, and I think you are going to find a lot of hope, a lot of inspiration, and it's interesting because it is somewhat juxtaposed to Hemingway's own life, but we're not going to talk about that because it's too depressing and too sad, and we're gonna get into the next thing. Okay, the next thing we have is H.P. Lovecraft. This is just a collection of his short stories, but in particular, I want you to read The Call of Cthulhu. I think if you read The Call of Cthulhu, you kind of have an understanding of Lovecraft. Lovecraft is not necessarily a good person, but his writing is just so unique that I think it's just well worth going in and reading. Very weird person. You could easily tell through his writing, but The Call of Cthulhu is essentially a story about this entity that exists and the cult around it, and it's written in the style of finding these papers and finding these stories and kind of unraveling this tale for yourself. And that's a lot of what his writing is that somebody discovers the writings of somebody else, and that it's a wild goose chase to find the end. And usually the enemies in or the bad guys or the entities in a Lovecraftian tale are like so pervasive, so all-knowing, and it's all about shadowiness and secret societies and all that interesting sort of stuff. And if that's anything that interests you, you really need to read The Call of Cthulhu. I think it's one of those tales that just you could have seen Cthulhu, you could have seen the octopus dragon hybrid and not known it came from Lovecraft, and that's just how influential Lovecraft is. But there's just a simplicity to his stories mixed with a horror, mixed with a dread, mixed with just the page turningness of his writing, and you're going to be very happy when you read this, and you're going to have a whole lot of fun reading it. And yeah, if you want to read another story, I think it's The Color of Outer Space is another really good one as well. But I would start with Call of Cthulhu. I think that's his best one I've read so far, or The Reanimator, which is actually just him kind of doing an ode to Mary Shelley and kind of making fun of the whole genre at the same time. But yeah, on to the last thing. Last thing we have is C.S. Lewis's The Space Trilogy, Out of the Silent Planet. I had so much fun reading this book. I really did. I didn't know what to expect. When you see Space Trilogy, you're expecting classic sci-fi tropes and all sorts of stuff like that. But I was pleasantly surprised because, I've read Dune, I've read Lord of the Rings, I've read those kind of stories, and don't get me wrong, I enjoy them. But you're not really gonna outdo Dune. You're not really gonna outdo the sheer philosophy mixed with the world building, mixed with all of the political scheming, mixed with the mythic scale to it. And just for that reason, I really haven't read that much sci-fi, because I'm just gonna read it and I'm gonna go, I want to read Dune. And you could say that's not a good opinion, but that's just my perspective right now. You could prove me wrong, I'm sure you can, but that's what I was expecting going into this. Whereas C.S. Lewis did something completely different than I was expecting. You're thinking, space lasers, fighting aliens, this, that. No, Out of the Silent Planet is essentially this professor goes to this planet, is kind of tricked there. He escapes from the people that take him prisoner, and instead of the classic kind of sci-fi kind of plot, he finds this alien species that nurses him back to health, and he begins to learn about the planet, and he begins to go to a journey to discover who rules over this world and all sorts of things. And it's not really about the conflict. While there is a little bit of conflict, while there is action, it's more so about discovering a new society, and the society isn't advanced in the way you think it is. It's more advanced than ours, but it's not in terms of technology. Well, it is in some ways, but it isn't in others. It's more so in their development. It's more so in the way in which they approach the world, and it's just so fascinating. I don't really want to reveal too many of the details so that you can go and read it yourself, but hopefully this is kind of your sign to go pick up any of these books, especially Out of the Silent Planet. I think out of all of these, I enjoyed Out of the Silent Planet the most, just simply for the fact that I've been reading a whole lot of stuff that's been boring recently, and Out of the Silent Planet was just such a pleasant surprise, such a good work, and I can't wait to read the rest of the trilogy. But with that said, let me know books that you would read if you had to go back, if you had to put yourself in your old shoes when you were first getting back into reading and you had a set plan. What would be the things that you would read first? What would be the things that you were looking for first? I think this is a somewhat good list, but honestly, with every list, there's always going to be exceptions. There was a lot of books that I left off of it, so I can always do a part two, or I can just take your guys' recommendations, take your guys' suggestions. If I haven't read them, hopefully I will get to read them soon. But yeah, with that said, I love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, peace out. I'll get you the next one. That's all I got. I thought I had something else to say, but I don't. So yeah, I'll see you later.